Aaron Rodgers faces tough question at Canadian Autos show his response shocks. Everyone. Aaron Rodgers stood at the podium, prepared to discuss the latest advancements in automotive technology, but a reporter quickly shifted the conversation. Aaron, the reporter asked, with all the talk surrounding your future in football, are you planning to play this season, or is retirement on the horizon? The room went quiet. All eyes were on Rodgers, awaiting his response. He took a moment, then spoke, his voice calm and measured. That is an interesting question, Rodgers said. But the truth is, I have a lot to think about. Football has been my life, but I need to be sure I am still giving the game everything it deserves. I do not want to be in a position where I am not fully committed. The reporter pressed further. So, you are not ready to make a decision yet? Rodgers paused again, then answered, I am not. I am still figuring out what the future holds, but it is not an easy decision. His response left the room buzzing. The questions surrounding Rodgers' future were far from over, but it was clear that the legendary quarterback was not ready to make any promises. The tension in the room remained palpable after Rodgers' cryptic response. The reporter's question had hit a nerve, and now everyone was waiting for the next reveal. Another reporter stood, clearly eager for more details. Aaron, you've mentioned giving the game everything it deserves. Are you saying you might not feel that level of commitment anymore? Rodgers exhaled, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the question. I did not say that, he replied firmly. But I think it is important for anyone in this profession to ask themselves if they still have the passion, the drive, and the health to keep going. Football is not just a job for me, it is something I have dedicated my life to, but I also want to make sure I'm not doing it for the wrong reasons. The audience sat in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. Rodgers was being more candid than usual, and it was clear he was carefully considering every response. A third reporter quickly followed up, sensing an opening. But with your legacy already secure, does the idea of playing for another season feel different now? Rodgers leaned back slightly, contemplating. That's exactly it. My legacy, it's already written, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But I do not want to play just to add more records or titles to my name. I want to play because I still have something to prove to myself more than anyone else. The room buzzed with murmurs. Rodgers wasn't saying anything definitive, but the direction of the conversation was clear. This was about more than just playing another season. The clock was ticking, and his decision was becoming more personal with every word. The questions continued to pour in, each one pressing deeper into Rodgers' mindset. The crowd could sense that this wasn't just a typical interview, it was a man wrestling with his own future. A fourth reporter raised their hand, eager to get more clarity. Aaron, you've mentioned the importance of commitment, the reporter said. What would it take for you to make the final decision to walk away from the game? Is there a moment, a feeling, or a circumstance that would make you say, this is it, it's time to retire? Rodgers looked out toward the audience for a moment, considering the question carefully. His face was calm, but his mind seemed far from it. He shifted in his seat and leaned forward slightly. I do not think there is just one moment that would make me walk away, he began slowly. It's a combination of factors. First, I have to make sure I'm still able to perform at the highest level. But more than that, I need to ask myself if I still enjoy the process, the work, the preparation, the grind. If the fun and the passion start to fade, that's when I will know it's time. Rodgers paused, almost as if he was speaking more to himself than to the crowd. The room was completely silent, hanging on every word. But I also believe that it's important to listen to your body, and more importantly, your mind. He continued, if I feel like I'm not bringing my best, I will walk away. It's about honoring the game and my career, and not overstaying my welcome. The reporters were silent for a moment, weight of Rodgers' honesty settling in. He was being completely transparent, and it was clear that the decision ahead would be one he made with careful thought, not just emotion. The crowd waited for his next words, but he had already said a lot more than anyone had expected. As the conversation moved forward, Rodgers' answers became even more introspective. The room remained quiet, with each reporter waiting for him to reveal more. Another voice called out, breaking the silence. Aaron, you've been in the league for so long and you've achieved nearly everything one could hope for. How does the idea of walking away affect you personally? Is it hard to imagine life without football? Rodgers sat up straighter, and for the first time during the interview, a slight hint of vulnerability appeared on his face. That's the hardest part, he said softly. Football has been my entire life. It's been my identity for so long. The relationships, the successes, the failures, everything is tied to the game. So, yeah, it's not an easy thing to imagine life without it. His voice became steady again, the weight of the question still lingering. But I've always said it's important to evolve. Life after football doesn't have to be a scary thought. It's about figuring out what I want next. I'm not sure what that is yet, but I know there's more out there than just being a football player. Rodgers' response surprised many. He had always been seen as someone who defined himself by the game, but now he was speaking of life beyond it. The audience had expected the usual confident answers, but this time Rodgers was offering a glimpse of the uncertainty that even the most successful athletes face. I've always embraced change, and whatever comes next, I'll be ready for it. But until then, I'll focus on football, because right now that's where I feel I belong. The room was silent once again, with many now wondering what this shift in perspective meant for Rodgers' future on the field. The host, sensing the moment of introspection was not over, pressed further. You've talked about evolution, about life after football, but how do you reconcile that with the expectation of greatness, with the pressure to perform at a high level every season? Rodgers paused, contemplating the question. It was clear that his mind was not just on the present, but also on the legacy he had built over the years. The expectation to be great, it's something I've lived with for most of my career, he replied. But greatness is a complex thing. It's not just about the accolades or records. It's about how you show up, how you lead, and how you inspire those around you. And it's also about recognizing when it's time to step aside and make room for others to take the reins. The reporter who had asked the question nodded, sensing the depth of Rodgers' words. So, you're not afraid of stepping away when the time is right? Rodgers looked him in the eye, unwavering. Not at all. It's actually more frightening to stay too long and tarnish what I've built. It's about knowing when to walk away on your own terms, with your head held high. The room was quiet, the tension building as everyone understood the gravity of what Rodgers was saying. His words weren't just about football, they were about one that he had lived by throughout his career. I know the time will come, Rodgers continued. I will know when it's time, and when that moment arrives, I'll be at peace with it. With those words, Rodgers made it clear. His journey was not defined by the game, but by his ability to evolve with it. His decision, whenever it came, would be his own. The reporter who had been asking the questions sat back, clearly impressed by Rodgers' candor. The atmosphere had shifted. What had started as an interview about football had evolved into a deep conversation about life, legacy, and self-awareness. Another reporter raised their hand, sensing an opportunity to probe further. Aaron, you've spoken about knowing when to walk away, the reporter began. But with the game changing, with younger players coming up fast, do you feel the pressure to keep up? Is that something you still care about? Rodgers thought for a moment, his eyes scanning. Pressure? Yeah, I've felt it, he said with a shrug. But it's not about competing with anyone else. It's about competing with myself. Every season, I've pushed myself to be better than the last. The moment I stop doing that, that's when I'll know it's time to go. The room was quiet as his words settled in. Rodgers had always been known for his competitive nature. But now, it was clear that his biggest rival was not the young quarterbacks vying for the spotlight. It was his own desire to keep evolving, to prove that he could still perform at the highest level. Do I feel like I need to keep up with the younger guys? Rodgers continued. Not really. They have their own path, and I have mine. But I do feel like I still have something to prove to myself. If that fire goes out, then I'll know it's time. But right now, I still feel it. The reporters nodded, understanding that Rodgers was no longer trying to prove anything to the outside world. His focus was on his personal growth, and that would guide his decision whenever it came. The fans, too, would be waiting, but Rodgers had already made it clear that he would walk away when the time was right for him. As the interview continued, there was a shift in the tone. The questions had become more introspective, and it seemed that everyone in the room, from the reporters to the audience, was genuinely curious about what Rodgers would say next. One final reporter stood up, eager to ask what everyone had been wondering. Aaron, the reporter began, you've talked about personal growth, legacy, and knowing when to step away. But if you had to look into the future, what would you want your final season to look like? What would make you feel like you ended things the right way? Rodgers paused, his gaze thoughtful as he weighed the question. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who had spent most of his career fiercely guarding his personal thoughts. I don't want a fairy tale ending, he said, his voice steady. I want to go out playing the game I love at the highest level. If I'm being honest, I don't think I'll ever know when it's truly time to walk away. But what matters to me is that I can look back and say I gave everything I had, and I did it the way I wanted. The room fell silent, absorbing the weight of his words. Rodgers wasn't talking about a perfect ending. He was talking about the satisfaction that comes from giving to your all. It wasn't about Super Bowls or records anymore. It was about integrity and authenticity in how he played and how he left the game. I've been through a lot in my career, and there's no perfect moment, Rodgers continued. But as long as I can still be proud of the way I approach the game, I'll be at peace. With those words, the conversation came to a close, leaving the audience with a deeper understanding of Rodgers' mindset. The future was uncertain, but his commitment to authenticity would guide him until the very end. As the interview wound down, the host smiled and looked at Rodgers. Aaron, thank you for your honesty. It's not often we get to hear an athlete speak so openly about their career, their legacy, and their future. I think I speak for everyone here when I say we truly appreciate sharing that with us today. Rodgers nodded, a small smile crossing his face. Thank you for having me. It's important to me that people understand where I'm coming from. Football has been my life, but I'm also a person who has a lot to reflect on, and I think that's just as important as anything I've done on the field. The crowd, which had been hanging on every word, gave a soft round of applause, appreciative of the rare glimpse into the mind of one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Rodgers had given them more than they expected. He had shared not just his career uncertainties, but also his vision of the future and what truly mattered to him. Before we finish, though, the host said, leaning in slightly, you've hinted at a decision coming soon. Do you have any message for your fans, those who have supported you through thick and thin, through all the ups and downs? Rodgers looked directly into the camera, his expression sincere. To my fans, I just want to say thank you. Your support means more to me than words can express. Whether I'm playing or not, I'll always be grateful for everything you've given me. You've been with me for the highs, and you've stuck with me during the lows. That's what matters the most, the connection we have and the memories we've created together. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. As for what happens next, I'll make that decision when the time is right, but I'll make sure that it's the right one for me and for everyone who's been there along. The host nodded, clearly moved by Rodgers' message. And we'll be here, waiting to see what comes next. The final words hung in the air as the interview came to an end. The room was filled with a quiet sense of finality, but there was also an understanding that this wasn't the end. Rodgers' career with all its achievements and challenges, was far from over. Whatever decision he made, it would be on his terms, guided by reflection, authenticity, and passion. What do you think? Will Aaron Rodgers continue to play, or is his time in the NFL coming to an end? Let us know your thoughts, and stay tuned for the next chapter in his legendary career.